Thank you, Jacob, for the introduction and so much more. It's kind of cold these days. So I'm wondering if everybody could please turn to your left and greet your neighbor, and turn to your right and greet your neighbor. Let's warm up this room. Great. You know, ever since I was a little kid, I was chasing after epiphanies. I mean, I had a big family and there was plenty to do, but I was chasing after epiphanies in nature. Like, I loved to slip out at night, and especially if it was raining, and just wander. And if there was a moon, all the better. And I would be gone for hours, and it was my secret place and secret time, and I thought, oh, something sublime, something true, something divine is gonna reveal itself to me. And then I'll have an answer of why. And as I got older, I became more self-conscious about that and thought, well, it's an immature intellect. You know, as you grow, epiphanies, they lose their depth. They never have any depth. I don't believe that. Now I think just chase after every epiphany you could find. And I also think that at the heart of that, through a lot of weeding in the garden, it's why I decided to become an artist. Because though I think there aren't that many epiphanies when you're making work, sometimes when you see a great work of art, music, theater, a painting, you feel that epiphany and it overcomes your whole body. And there are no words for it. Words are stupid, they fall apart. And I am so grateful to be here tonight in a room full of people who believe in epiphanies. I think that anthropomorphism is the first act, or not even an act, it's the first inkling of imagination. And coupled with anthropomorphism is empathy. It's something greatly lacking these days. It seems so sentimental and syrupy and weak-kneed, when in fact it's a lack of imagination. I'm gonna not share with you images tonight that are in any particular chronological order, but that more follow trains or ramblings of ideas. And I'm starting with the angel tree from St. John's Island, where part of my family is here. It's over 500 years old, and of course it's a two-dimensional photograph, but I just encourage everyone to visit this tree one day. I'm sure everyone has a tree in their own life, but this one is particularly, it's like a whole community. And for this live oak, which is the variety of oak tree that it is, for those branches that sometimes extend 20 feet and more, for the way for them to be supported, self-supported, they go back down into the ground, and then they come back up, and they go back down into the ground, and come back up and spread back out. And this is very close to where I grew up in the low country of South Carolina. I'm gonna, I'm gonna share a few paintings just to give a little background of, of my origins. And this is the horseman and the rider. In Haitian Vodun, when you are in a ceremony, when you are in an exalted, expanded state, it is felt that the horseman comes and rides you, meaning the big spirit, much bigger than your finite little package, expands you into time and space phenomena. And you lose your self-centeredness into something much larger. So this losing of the self happens in two instances in the Vodun belief system. When you're at a ceremony and you are ridden by the horseman, or when you are preparing for battle and you lose that sense of being a part of our species. And a few more paintings done about this time, a while ago. I'm going to read a little bit. My native environment was the valley and mountains of East Tennessee's Appalachian Mountains, folding in on themselves, curving wildly, green upon green land that first cradled my twin brother, me, and my family. This land created a haptic calling that kept me curving around to the other side, knowing that if I shifted slightly on one foot, a wholly new view would envelop me. We were forever out in it, swamp, woods, creeks, and swimming in quarries or meandering river coves. Sundays lined us up in pews, though I would say that ultimately the value of this religious education was that it pointed to an interior life. Whatever the maelstrom therein, it is real and could be filled with hymns. This I have carried with me wherever my wide-ranging explorations have taken me. My early questions spiraled around religion. It was the Bible Belt, is the Bible Belt, stirring up ferocious internal arguments. In college, I met René Descartes and continued to quarrel over the relentless dualistic thinking that cast me as a woman with a short stick. And Freud piled it on further, since I didn't even have a stick. Happily, this led me down many paths and dreamscapes in particular, where I've met Hecate, Enheduanna, a Mesopotamian priestess and the world's first known author. Gilgamesh is a compilation, as with all oral cultures, of many, many authors. Gilgamesh was also a king of Uruk in Mesopotamia, and Enheduanna was the world's first author. And she actually had a deity that she sang hymns to, who was the deity of writing. Talk about an astonishing invention, writing. Later, I met Ishtar, deity of Assyria and Mesopotamia, Bell Hooks, author and writer, Irie Bibalo, feminist literary scholar of Ivory Coast, and much other vital company. I had to get out. Being raised in the South, Appalachia and the low country of South Carolina nourished me. Simultaneously, it propelled me to search for other ways of living. Years later, a Fulbright fellowship allowed me to live in West and Central Africa, in a place where I felt that art and community and belief were interwoven. The abstractions of observed form in much African art speak of the ever-present world of intangibles, of metaphysicals. Unlike Western modernism, this was distinct from European preoccupation with lightness and exalting the individual. I wasn't interested in painting the individual, the portrait. I was interested in the everyman, the everywoman. For me, much of West African art embodies emotional truths, and the aesthetic expressions of ritual, of music, and dance also found a big home in my heart. The elastic continuum of biological life fascinates me, awe-inspiring as it is. A preoccupation with the interrelatedness of all life, of mutable boundaries, has been consistent throughout my work. In both my sculpture and painting, forms are hybrids of mingled boundaries, alluding to an ancient kinship with our fellow animals and our own mutability. My sculptures, which have been described as a nativity of squirms, express the force, distress, and urgency of biological life today. I remember looking at some early Cézanne drawings, or even more so, the later drawings. And I've got to mention Cézanne, I'm speaking at the studio school. And he would trace, he would try to find that contour of the edge of the form. And then he wouldn't erase it. He'd put another line to, again, try to find where the edge of that form was. And then he knew the little trick of just shifting slightly, closing one eye, closing the other. No life form is ever still, so that by optic fact of our seeing, that we see through both eyes, not one. But my lack of being able to pin down the edge was less related to what Cézanne was trying to do than my distrust, perhaps, in that no form has any shape that is ever still for long. Desire drinks where it will. That's the kitchen help, I guess, coming out. Come sit with us. The animal imagery in my work is a bridge between ourselves and nature, offerings to divinity, as well as sacrifice to our voracious appetites. Both sculptures and paintings celebrate all creatures and all bodies. Painting has been in my life for many years. Then I accidentally fell in love with ceramics. And when I was living in West and Central Africa, I also fell in love with ceramic, fell in love with sculpture, fell in love with the three-dimensional. This sculpture is from the Bamileke people, from a subset of the Bamileke people culture, the Bamoun of the grass fields of northern Cameroon, an area where I lived for a while, and the previous one also is from the grass field cultures. And this beauty you can see at the Metropolitan Museum in the newly installed collections in the formerly, was it John J. Rockefeller wing? Michael, of course. I remember the first time I touched clay, I just couldn't believe how incredibly supple it was. And then I also very quickly discovered there was inside and outside. Inside and outside for somebody who had painted for many years. A damn picture plane. It's got it this way and it's got it that way, and it's flat. It's two-dimensional. And you can really get inside of a sculpture. I think one day I'll do a sculpture big enough so that I can actually get into it. I remember Io's mother putting her head inside of a sculpture. I looked over, she had her head up inside there. The clay and my body knew one another. My hands felt at home. Maybe because it's so atavistic and so in our DNA since always. The erotics of being, of having a body is vivified in working with mud. It's made alive in a most palpable way. The visceral open space for other bodies. It also opens space for longing and for desire and for immense vulnerability, which is something that's always interested me. It seems in our day and age before the last 15 years, it's like, where is the place of vulnerability in art? And of course, it's expressed in an infinite number of ways, but it's there. It's as real a part of our lives as anything. Vulnerability, power, restlessness, ferocity, tenderness are seeming contradictions that have questioned me and stayed with me always. And here is a really bad photo. It's not that bad when it's this size, but taken in Ivory Coast when I was living there in 92 and 93, and studying the masquerading ceremonies and the music and the mythologies. Basically, the opera of West Africa. And Ivory Coast and this particular group of people are particularly celebrated for their extraordinary masking ceremonies. It was a part of what I was talking about earlier of community, where the performative and the material arts are one, have been one. This is my first large-scale sculpture, and this is at a wonderful place in the Netherlands called the European Ceramic Center. And you can see it's got a lot of trussing there, and it's, you really, one thing I love about working in ceramics is you're kind of on your own improvising. There are no formulas of how to get from A to B to Z. And this form I had in mind took quite a while to build, so that secret of how you keep the first part of the form, which is at the base there, moist and malleable and still workable when a month later you're working on something that is quite far from that. So here's a little bit of my arsenal. And the final sculpture, which I call Bathsheba, and where I really went to town on that idea of the inside and outside. And actually, after the first firing, I almost passed out with horror that I had made something so hideous. Just like, it just made me want to retch. And then I got back into my feet, hardened my solar plexus, and said, okay, go back in to fire it again. And I realized when it came out of the kiln the second time that, I realized what my intention was. You know, we describe our intention about our work in so many different ways, but distilling it down takes time. And sometimes it's maybe 10 years after you've finished a work. You know one of the answers of why, or one of the possibilities of why. But I wanted to put death and life, slam them together in one form. So the shiny interiority here, fecund and alive, and then the encrusted, been buried in the sea 500 years exterior. I was inspired by the tortoise, the carapace of the tortoise, the form of lower body and upper body. And I also have looked long and was thinking about when Bathsheba came about talk about power figures. This is Lamassu of Nineveh, one of the guardians of the city. This is a Mesopotamian guardian. And you can see it's quite a power figure. It's a bull deity. And sometimes they're conceived of as female. You don't call them bulls, though. But I had seen this sculpture and reproductions of it for years, and it wasn't until recently someone pointed out, to enhance the dynamism of this form, there are not 4 legs. There are 5. And I had looked at it so many times and had somehow overlooked that. This sculpture, Oracle, was one of the successor to the very first little ceramic sculpture I made, which was about this big. About this big. I made it in the Netherlands when I was on a residency there, and I put a gold glaze on it. It just seemed kind of otherworldly and exotic to me. But the whole impetus behind that sculpture was not an idea. I had something of the hare in mind. I'd had a dream that saved my life about this big rabbit. But it was a physical urge to put my hand into that clay and find something in there, and then come out and find something else, and to see how they, in a topological way, were interconnected to one another. So this was the first stage of this sculpture, made with this fabulous oily black clay. This is in China, where I'd had an invitation to work the first time in 2018. And when I finished, I was barely able to keep the ears on. I got it over, actually 4 men on like a palanquin, carried it over to these incredible mold makers. And I was looking around their workshop at their amazing work, and I turned around and I saw that there were 4 men squatting around it. They had knives, and they had lopped off the ears. And they were beginning their analysis of how to make molds out of this, 24 molds to make this piece. Because there's a lot of interior forms. Oracle is the clue to some of the interior forms. There's a phallic, clitoris, a lingam, a lingual element. It's an oracle, it speaks. But you don't see that until you get down low. And I had a show in Virginia some years ago, and I had a number of these oracle figures in there. And I turned around, and there were 4 little children who were the only ones in the room that got the rest of the story, because they were right at eye level and looking in and giggling. They knew something was up. And, furthering this and kind of enhancing this fascination with the inside-outside, this is the interior of one of the pieces of mold of the oracle. So it's actually, when the mold is made for this, after the thing is chopped up and quartered, the clay, this porcelain, is actually quite thin and needs reinforcing. So they made the most wonderful, that's looking down inside of, once several of the pieces of the upper body were put together. I'm like, this is the sculpture I want to make. And here are 4 of the pieces, or well, 2 of the 2 of the oracles coming out of the big kiln. You see the kiln master on the right in the blue shirt, an amazing man that knows how to speak with fire and make fire speak. And there's one of the oracles with 2 different bronzes and another slightly different with obviously an entirely different glaze. The first time I met this character face to face, because I had seen it in reproductions, was in China. And it was just, I felt like, oh, I'm home. I know right where I am. Because I had loved for years to, I think that one of my first forays in working three-dimensionally was, I went to this store of toys, and I bought all these animals, and I used a friend's bandsaw and chopped up the animal and put a crocodile head on a cow body. And so when I saw this, I'm like, great, sow's ears, the haunches of a lion. These are called Zhenmushao. This one's particularly over the top. And they weren't considered art. They were actually from the Tang Dynasty, an animistic period, 316 to 400 and something. I think I have those dates close enough. And they guarded the dead until they could pass over from the land of the living. They also were earth spirits. They guarded the spirits of the earth. And I wanted to make a contribution to this extraordinary, very Chinese character. I'd never seen anything like it. And the glazes were as over the top as the form. So here she is, my contribution to the Zhenmush. With, she's ferocious, but she can also feed 18. And when I was working on it, I made several heads, and I had all these heads around, and this body, which I kind of felt, okay, I'm getting there. But I didn't know what to do with the heads. They were just, like, you can't have so many heads on a body without, missing in some way. And then I sliced one of them in half, and here's the back of a different sculpture, but the back of, so the eyes on the back of the head. And that sculpture's upstairs. And then these horns or flames, they've been interpreted in various ways. And Mai Zhenmush is outraged at what we're doing to her creatures, to Earth's creatures. So the ferocity here is very much what this figure is. And side by side, cheek by jowl, is this sculpture, which I've never really come up with a name for it. For a while I called them the vestigials. That wasn't quite right. Now the name I've settled on is kin, because I think we're related to them, you know, like we are to the big turtle. And this kin is in a little garden of sorts, totally vulnerable, on its back, a tetrapod. Most of the tetrapods on the earth are aquatic, four-limbed. There's a great African saying, what has a head can be tamed. There's no head here. So small and helpless as it is, it's maybe more than meets the eye. And this is, I'm sorry, I couldn't resist putting this in. This is in the Huangshan Mountains, the Yellow Mountains of China, which is quite close to the city of Jingdezhen, where I was working. And Carl and I climbed this, climbed in the mountains, and most of the time you're walking on a, you know, I don't think insurance companies are so huge in China. Because you're walking on this tiny little ledge, and maybe there's a little fence like that. You're out there. It is so dizzying. And you're seeing these mountains that you know from poems, from Chinese poems. And they're there. And everywhere there's a tree, there's a rock that has been written about, that is the subject of a poem. It is astonishingly moving. And when we got to the place where we were staying up in the mountains, I found our little cozy room and I passed out, and Carl went out for the rest of the night exploring in the fog. But I really passed out from, there's that word for when you are overcome by the emotions of something so beautiful and beyond the human ability to reckon with. Anybody know that word? Another vulnerable creature, I just learned this word. It's actually a technical term for, if you've ever seen, I grew up near swamps, and my twin brother was particularly in the swamps. There were occasionally frog legs in the skillet that he was happily, proudly presenting to mother for breakfast while she was still in bed, and he was thrilled. So I grew up around a lot of creatures like that, the liminal creatures. And when the female decides that she's ready to mate, she is overwhelmed in these amplexuses with dozens, sometimes hundreds of males. And I loved that idea. I just thought that well, I mean, but the whole visual thing of it, it's just so crazy. But again, the impetus behind this, I mean, there's, you know, anecdotal and personal things, but was this, that incredibly tender, vulnerable spot in all of us, the throat, right? The throat. When your throat is open, you better be in a safe place. And so I kind of built it around that, the throat of the frog on its back, on the bottom of the heap. And I've made many of these. It's maybe through with me, but I just love the impossibility of the loosened boundaries, of the interwoven forms. And another extraordinary, for me, an extraordinary sculpture of vulnerability. The first time Mary Magdalene was portrayed not as a beautiful, fetching maiden, but as somebody who had been out in the desert, a seeker. And she was pretty bedraggled by the time she returned to the village. This is Donatello, Mary Magdalene in Florence. And it's wood, and it's larger than life size. I was also thinking about aging, another expression of vulnerability. And the beginning of a sculpture that I was having a lot of fun with. And again, you see there's an interior labyrinth of, I'm improvising, but so it's a kind of casual engineering of soft materials because this thing has to support itself while it's drying, and then of course after it's dried. So this is the interior this is a kindred sculpture, not this exact same one, but my first sculpture that, and this is a rig from a Key Grips, on a film set. This is, Carl loaned me and set up this rig so I could support this thing while I was working on it. The first one I built was upside down. Not a good idea. But this is, Carl looked over, we were in the studio one day and he goes, "What the hell are you working on?" And I said, I don't know really. And he said, "Well, it looks like a heffalump." And it caught me off guard for a moment and I said, "What's a heffalump?" He said, "Piglet's imaginary friend with woozles." Woozles and heffalumps exist only in Piglet's imagination. And it was great. Of course it was a heffalump. I just didn't know what the name was yet. It was also a way of me shifting from the ponderous, the vulnerable, the power figures, to something totally goofy and improbable. Only this heffalump is crowned with a stupa. It's an architectural form that I'd always been fascinated by. I didn't want to put a head in. It was too delimiting. I knew it had 3 or 4 legs, and so it was mobile and moving. But a head gets into other things that I just didn't want to go there. And the stupa, or reliquary of sacred objects in Buddhist architecture, is such a magnificent form. I've always hated steeples. It's just like a needle sticking up in the sky. So for me, a stupa, these rounded forms piled on top of one another, or sometimes just one, was so inviting. And here's from this summer, the interior of a kiln that's just starting up. They just got the fire going, and then there'll be a lot of adjustments of the gas flowing into the pipes and making sure that everything is set just so before the big doors are closed. I haven't said anything about glazes, but it's always been something that in working three-dimensionally, I just but I miss paint, I miss color. But glazes are so mysterious. Anybody who's worked with glazes knows that you have no idea, except experiments that you have done before, what that matte gray slurry that you're putting on the form, what color it's going to be. except for earlier experiments, you have no idea what the color is. So you have to do a lot of experiments in advance, or you should. I didn't at first. I thought, oh, heck, I'm just not that kind of person. But it is a collaboration with fire, and there is always the movement of water. And with glazes, the astonishing alchemy of chemicals, of minerals from the earth. So when I first did a couple of experiments with this glaze, I thought, oh gosh, this looks just like the creeks I used to jump through and swim in and splash in. It just made me think of creek water and the light on the surface. And here is the loading of the kiln that we saw lit earlier, but this is the loading of the glazed works with, again, with the fire master, the Shifu, and Dr. Robert Osen. He's just recently gotten his doctorate from Uganda, a fabulous man an artist who helped me immensely. I couldn't resist putting this in, especially since it was something that I was looking at when I was working on these next series of sculptures, Gravity and Grace, with the cobra. Cobras, 7 of them. And this is the first of the Gravity and Grace. I wanted to kind of hearken back to Bathsheba, but with a difference, of course. And so I gave this figure, I'll get back to that one, these kind of, the extended sides, kind of arms in an embrace. I mean, it's not a snuggly embrace, but the arms are opened out. And I was also thinking of the aquaba, the senufo bird from Ivory Coast and Senegal, of the bird with the wings open like this. You all seen it, it's a very popular West African sculpture. The bird, wings squared, and this immense belly, fecundity in all ways, and the long, long beak touching the belly, keeping one's own counsel. So there was a little bit of that in here, and then it went off in its own direction. And then that interiority in the lower portion of this figure. And I didn't put it in here, but when I was working with the mold makers, I noticed in their working on the lower portion there, that they were making little, what I thought of as shelves. So there's actually a grid in the lower belly at the back, or the lower portion. And I had just lost my beloved nephew, Nicholas, and I'm like, oh, this is also a memory place for people who you've lost. So I made all these little cups. Well, I first inscribed the name of loved ones that I've lost, and inscribed them. The glaze, of course, overtook that, but and then I made all these little cups for those that have gone on to drink from. Our beloved beast of burden, the donkey, and of course it has 2 heads. Which way to go? In painting, the challenge of how to keep the picture plane alive has always goaded me. This challenge is neither figurative nor abstract, since it is essential to all pictorial tension. With ceramics, the question is how to keep the form alive, to somehow express an inner life. How to create a stable form that still moves, suggests, transforms, and resists becoming static. How to create a fired body that is haunted and flashes with generative spirit.
That's it.
Thank you, everyone. I would love to hear some questions and challenges.
We have
John knows
time for
this.
some challenges and some questions. But before we get to that, through this door to Jenny Lynn's our left is the reception for this. Please come. Please come after these challenges and challenge her further up close if you can. But if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone. Oh, perfect.
The question is like not going back for seconds.
We got a question.
Hi. This is a basic question. When ceramic breaks and you want to piece it together, or you want to refire and you want to reglaze, or you want to work back into it, because you said that you went back into whatever had already been fired. What do you do?
You erase what you had in mind. Or you cut it down to size. And you say, okay, what is it becoming now? Whether you're going to use those parts to cobble together, use as pieces in some kind of collage of vitreous material, or whether you want to try to put them together and reglaze, but use, as did probably the most famous of our century, Gaudi did, in making a mosaic kind of form. There's no easy answer. And believe me, when I first started this, Ronnie knows, I would ask people, questions like, how do you know what color it's going to turn out? And they would kind of laugh and say, well, just keep working. I thought, people are being so cagey about this. No one will give me an answer to any question I've asked them. And it really is because you're kind of on your own. Just kind of inventing, improvising. You have to be open to improvisation. And, I should say, most importantly, the humbling fact of working in ceramics is that you relinquish a kind of control that you thought you had in making your art, in making your work, because it is a collaborative endeavor. I'm not talking about the person who's working next to you. I'm talking about the fire and the materials. The fire has so much to say about what happens. And you can expect to lose about as much as arrives whole. Yes, Susanna. Here, do you want to?
I don't have to use the teacher voice. When you were shifting from working mostly in paint and in 2 dimensions, and I remember when you started to work in clay, what was it like? What was the shift for you like during that period when you could feel the call of this new way of making images?
You know, it was self-delusion for a long while because, or a mixture of thinking that time is not as complex as it is or intractable, because for a long while I was going back and forth, and whenever I talked about it, I'm like, oh, I love the way that painting complements working 3-dimensionally. I love the way you can, and I still draw and paint some, but of course it's not that easy to go back and forth. The materiality alone dictates, with painting, dictates so much from one. The materiality of working in ceramics is so demanding. I think, I'm so old to have started working in ceramics. I will be the first one to admit that, because it takes a lifetime just to understand glazes to come to any deep understanding. For a while, I was mad about green. I had to find green. There's a sculpture out there, the fish. It's a roof guardian, and it's in the foyer there. And the interior, and you saw some in the slides here, the interior and a little bit at the back of that form is this incredible green, totally toxic green. That is the green that has been banished from everywhere for decades. It's lead green. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I should have included some of the images because they're startling. I was glazing these pieces with this stuff. I didn't know what the color was until you opened the jar and had it all mixed. But it was this cadmium orange. I'm talking orange with oomph, you know, with an ass behind it, just orange. It's not red, it's orange. And when I looked through a little vitrine in the kiln, the orange vanished and becomes that green. And that's when somebody that I was working with, who's been in the biz for a long time, goes, oh God, this is lead. But I did ask a friend out in New Mexico about green, and he started laughing at me. And he said, you want a green? Well, you know, be prepared to spend a lifetime looking for that green. I have a friend down the road here in New Mexico who's been working with reds, copper reds, a particular kind of copper red. It's been about 45 years. And that's the only glaze that he works with. You know, tweaking it this way, tweaking it that way. Where you put it in the kiln, if it's in the upper left shelf, it's gonna be radically different than if it's in a lower right shelf. And I find that exciting and sometimes just maddeningly humble, like, I'm an idiot. What am I doing? This is, you know, chasing after what? Chimera. Julie.
And then you told us about being brought up in the... At what did you leave behind the religious imagery of, you know, Christianity and recognize something in the or to go towards tree and
the animist. He really was. I mean, he knew the Bible verses and blah, 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 but he was himself when he was out in the woods or swimming in the ocean. He would take me when I was a child and pull me out. A storm was coming. You want to go swimming? Yeah, he was, that was his happy place. Or being underwater, scuba diving. So and I didn't grow up with a lot of religious iconography. It was there. That's how I met El Greco. And of course, much astonishing. But actually, with El Greco, it's interesting because, well, no, I won't go there. I'll get off on a tangent I can't reel in from.
So I have a question and a microphone. Thank you, Julie. So you've been talking about and educating a lot of us about the trials and tribulations and chance and heartbreak of ceramics. But can you describe to us one of those truly epiphanal moments that you had when you opened up the kiln door?
It's funny, when I was putting images together, I came across a photo. Carl must have slipped in because it was like 5:30 in the morning, where I slipped back down to the big kiln room to open the kiln after I had reglazed Bathsheba. And I'm standing there with my hand, kind of partially over my face, and you could see the tears running down my face. When I thought, oh yeah, I wanted to put life, some ideas, some suggestion of life and death right together. Because that's our bodies, It's always coming into being, and it's always dying. It's, just, a matter of time. There are other moments, but I'm afraid if I get started, I won't stop.
Speaking of stopping, that's all we have time for. Thank you, Jenny Lynn.
Everybody, I'm just wondering, before we go on to some food, I'm just wondering if you feel like you have a place at the table right now. Because if you don't have a place at the table right now, you're on the menu. You will be eaten. Already we see all around us every day, mostly strangers, some people that we know or know of, somebody who knows, being eaten. The very first African American to run for president, the very first woman to run for president was who? Shirley Chisholm, of course. And she said, if there is not a seat for you at the table, bring your folding chair. We got to get our folding chairs ready and be at the table because we're needed. I love New York.